My name is Jacqueline Johnson. I'm the CEO and founder of Create and Cultivate, and I am joined by content creator and photographer Lydia Hudgens today to talk about how fashion is embracing inclusivity across all categories and how you can be part of the change. So welcome, Lydia.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive in, just tell us a little bit about your background and yourself.
So as you mentioned, I'm a photographer. I went to school for photography in San Francisco, the Academy of Art University, about, I want to say like almost 20 years ago at this point. And I got my bachelor's degree in fine art photography, and obviously took a very direct shift from that. And so I started working with fashion bloggers actually in San Francisco. Some of the first fashion bloggers I ever shot were like Blair Eady of Atlantic Pacific. It was like one of the first people. And then when I moved to New York, Nicolette Mason, Gabby Fresh were like two of the first people I ever worked with. And it's just kind of like sort of spiraled from there. I've been working with influencers for a really long time. I'm actually not really working with influencers anymore. I mostly work directly with brands and models now at this point. I do still, like, Nicolette's still like an ongoing client and friend at this point. But I don't work with a ton anymore at this point.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, I love Nicolette. She is the best. But yeah, what I love about your career story rather is that, you've kind of bounced around, right? Like you started in fine art, you went on to street style essentially and blogger, and now obviously working on the campaign side. So you kind of hit every single echelon of like fashion photography. So can you tell us what inspired you to kind of make these different transitions and shifts? Was it where the dollars were? Was it, your interest in passion? What were you sort of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think I first started with bloggers because I was like, oh, this is such an interesting world, because you kind of get best of both worlds, which I think is obviously what brands are kind of banking on as well, because you have a model, you have a hair and makeup, and you have a stylist all wrapped up into one person. So that was kind of like when I started working with influencers. Like one of my really good friends, Jenny Lodge, no longer is an influencer, but she was like one of the first people I really started shooting with. And I remember just being like, oh, this is so awesome. Like it's so easy because I don't have to have a team of people. Obviously on a production level, that's really, really helpful. So I started doing that. And then when I came out here, it was just like a really good way to like build sort of a client base. So I started doing that. And then honestly, when I moved into working with a lot of plus size influencers, that's kind of where my career started like taking a shift, because I feel like more brands took notice of me. Just because I do feel like as a plus woman now, I was more of like a size, like I was an in between when I first started shooting plus people, but I feel like you definitely sort of have a viewpoint and perspective that's a little different than most photographers that aren't used to working with plus bodies. And then from there, I just started working with brands directly, and I've been doing a lot of model tests the last year or so, and that's kind of where I've geared most of my work, just because I can be a little bit more creative. I feel like with brands and just like with influencers in general, there's a lot of like, I mean, if you have a campaign brief, it's obviously very specific. So I'm allowed to like be a little bit more creative and experiment when I do things for myself, which has been really just like fulfilling. And I've been working a lot with film recently. Is sort of something I've dived back into. I had a degree with fine art photography, so that's sort of my background. But in the last like 2 years, I started picking up film again. So.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, you worked with some of the biggest names in the plus size space. So Gabby Gregg, Nadia Abelson, Nicolette Mason, et cetera. And then all these size inclusive brands started kind of coming to you to shoot their campaigns, Henning, Beta, et cetera. So, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that, the fashion industry is changing, is from the supply chain to the visuals, the media is no longer centered around this traditional, size zero, Hollywood celebrity it girl sort of thing. That said, diversity takes many forms, including but not limited to, race, gender, age, ability, and sexual orientation. But as so many of us know and have experienced firsthand, a diverse representation in the fashion industry isn't necessarily always an inclusive one. So from your perspective, how have you seen things change for the better, and where do you think there's still opportunity for the fashion industry?
I mean, It's been really interesting because like I actually Amanda Richards, who I was speaking about earlier off camera, I think with you, but she is the girl that started the editor was for InStyle magazine, who did the first
Mm.
size street style gallery. And like I feel like that kind of like branched off like a whole different conversation. A lot of different magazines and publications were starting to do more inclusive street style galleries in itself, which I think is such a huge, like we're not used to seeing it. Like we're used to like we're used to like, you know, all the galleries where it's just like a bunch of, you know, very beautiful outfits, I guess, for the majority of them. Some of them are not, like it's literally just like people in jeans and a t-shirt. They're getting featured because they're a size 0 to like 4, you know? So I think that I've definitely noticed just like a shift in that perspective over the past few years, just with like street style stuff, but also just like brands and like I feel like even agencies are starting to use like or have a more diverse board because brands are asking for it, which I think is amazing. Like one of my favorite agencies is We Speak, and I feel like they have
Hmm.
such a diverse board. They have older models, they have non-binary, as you mentioned, they have you know, male models, they have curved models. It's just like I feel like a lot of people are starting to do that now, which I think is so important. So
Yeah, definitely. I think there has been a change, and even more so away from, I think early on it was a little tokenism, right? It's like, okay, well, we have a black model, we have, you know, an Indian model, whatever it might be, to like, let's just have let's have what we see in the world out there in terms of not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera, which is really, you know, where you come into play as well. But, you know, I read in a recent interview that one of the underlying themes to your work is beauty and what that means in today's society. So how has the definition of beauty changed in today's society? And what is it about the value that society places on beauty that really has kind of, you know, shifted this perception?
yeah, I mean, I think again, it's like coming down to those sort of like standards of beauty that we're used to seeing. Like, I think that like even in the plus size community, or just like like previously and still, to be honest, we're used to seeing a very specific body type. So we're used to seeing like the Kim Kardashian body type, but plus, you know what I mean? So very curvy or very hourglass, and like that's the acceptable fat size. So like I mean, and I don't fall into that category. I'm also shaved with tattoos, and like, I'm obviously like, I do think that like beauty means so many things for different people. We all have our own aesthetic, you know, form of expression. I think that we should be allowed to like have that for us because, like, especially as straight size people, I feel like you are allowed to kind of like go off the rails and experiment with your fashion. But I think in terms of like the non-traditional aspects of beauty, we're not as much. So that's what I really try to focus on in my personal work. The majority of my models that I do work with on my like personal work side are typically, you know, plus size, or they're, you know, I try to, you know, have a good diverse casting with who I'm working with. I work with non-binary models, work with Black models, I work with plus size, I work, you know, across the board. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just like I kind of, and I also think too with like plus or like even in the body positive community, I think a lot of it is stressed on the fact that you have to love yourself all the time. But I think it's really just a lot of body acceptance. Wow, words today are so great. Body acceptance and like body neutrality. So like it doesn't always have to be on the like beauty on the outside. It can be just how you feel on the inside. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I've seen Nicolette talk a lot about the body neutrality sort of movement because I think a lot of brands, you know, and I think a lot of brands are probably watching this and maybe a lot of retailers and buyers and things like that. So what advice would you give to them if they're going into that realm? Like if they're going to launch a plus line or if they're going to play in that space, like what advice or what mistakes do people often make or like what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I've seen, because I've actually, unfortunately, I was part of a brand launch that happened 2 years ago, and the brand went under during COVID.
COVID.
And just seeing what they were doing in terms of like what they were creating, I think a lot of brands tend to launch and they're like, well, okay, we're going to, if it's a straight size brand, for instance, they have like, you know, if you look on their website, there's like maybe 1,000 SKUs, and then they launch their plus size section and it's 25 SKUs.
Right.
Like as a plus and consumer, I don't feel included in that conversation. And I feel like that's a really big mistake I see. I also like, I'm really tired of hearing the word flattering Like, I don't want to hear it anymore, because as a plus person, that automatically just makes me feel like flattering to me means that it makes me look smaller. And
Right.
like, I feel like a lot of people kind of like tiptoe around that conversation, but I see that everywhere. Every single plus brand uses that word, and I'm so tired of hearing it, because it's fat phobia, just like hidden. You know what I mean? I think another thing too is I want to see different size diversity. Like, I want to see people using different body shapes. I want to see a size 16, 18. I want to see a 20, 24. I want to see an apple shaped body. I want to see a whole different range and not the same models over and over again. There are amazing models that I think are not getting highlighted as much, just because they don't fit into that very stereotypical, like, fat accepted body type. You know what I mean? And I think that as a consumer, we want to see that too. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, language is so important. And I mean, just thinking about flattering, like that's so true. Like I never even would have thought about that, but that's
yeah.
so
And it's interesting.
language is coded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I had a girlfriend, my best friend, we had a conversation about it. She's like, I don't really think that flattering means it in that same like wavelength as you do. And I'm like, but you're straight sized. Like, you're
Right.
not getting that word thrown at you the same way that I'm getting that word thrown at me. Like, maybe you're thinking flattering for your skin tone, or flattering for, like, you know what I mean? But it always has to come back to the body and like the way the body looks. And highlighting the like skinny areas of your body, or just creating the right shape. And I think it just needs to be like, I want to wear this because it's cute. Like, this is not a flattering outfit that I'm wearing. Like, it's shapeless, like, but I love it because it's fun and playful. And like, I think that's what people want to see, is like different things that kind of break out of that mold a little bit. You know what I
I
mean?
mean, I love a shapeless anything.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Especially
it's
now
so true.
during COVID, I just want to be comfortable, So it's like,
Oh,
I don't
for sure.
get skin tight on, and like, I mean, you're not going to see me in a pair of jeans in a while. You know what I mean? So
No, for sure, for sure. I put on like an actual top the other day and I was like so uncomfortable. I was like, wait, is this what I was like?
yeah,
But no, I totally feel you. But I think copy and language so important. I think that's a great tip. Also, a larger range, right? Like you said. And another thing I hear quite often is that, having it available in the store. Obviously, right now that's a little bit different,
yeah.
but
I mean, I kind of feel like that is going to shift a little bit, especially with COVID. I feel like more and more people are going to shop online, um,
mm,
just in terms of like what I'm seeing. But I do feel like the other thing that I would recommend is, like, I just helped launch, or I shot a lookbook for this brand that is launching, and they are only doing sizes 14 to 24. And I also think that's a mistake, because I don't think that's truly inclusive anymore. I mean, it's not inclusive. Like, being inclusive is going beyond a size 24. And I think a lot of brands are like afraid to do that larger size run. And it just means like doing it well too. That's another thing. I feel like a lot of brands tend to just like, well, okay, this is our 14. So we're just going to add 2 more inches here and here and here. But like, what happens is when I gain weight, it's going to gain weight in different areas. You know what I mean? So just like really being on it with fit models and stuff like that as well.
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it really goes beyond just the models, right? It's the people making the clothes. It's the people
Totally.
having these decisions in the boardroom and all that stuff. And you yourself have been on the other side of the camera modeling. So you bring this unique perspective of both being the photographer and then being the model as well. So what has your experience been on both sides of the lens, and how does upholding an accurate reflection of reality change between the role of the subject and the photographer? I know there's a lot of influencers, and it's where they just show different poses that people do that make them look skinnier online, and it's like
Yeah.
the whole thing is a kind of a crazy thing to see, just based on the world that we're living in, which is Instagram and Facetune and blah blah blah. So what was that experience like for you, being on both sides of the lens, and what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I first started, because I mean, I was always behind the camera. And then, like, a couple years, I feel like it was like maybe 4 years ago, I started getting in front of the camera more, just because people were like, well, I like your style. Like, why are you not featuring yourself? And And then I kind of spiraled, and I was like, I'd started doing it, and then I would start taking in here and there, and I would start liquefying, and I would start doing this. And then I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I'd look back at photos that I took, and I was like, I don't look like that. And it didn't look good. Like, if I looked at the original shot, I was like, that looks so much better, because that's the reality. So that's definitely something I've noticed, because I feel like people just kind of do it without thinking. Like, Facetune is just such a thing. People just go into the app and they're like, oh, well, no one will notice if I do this or this. And it becomes a very like negative, toxic mind frame, because you just fall into it without really recognizing what it's actually doing to you. Yeah, I mean, I think too, like, I personally don't really retouch at all anymore, especially now that I've kind of moved into film. I really like stress to my clients and my models that, like, if they want additional retouching, I'm going to charge you more, because I don't do it. Like, that's just not like what I'm about anymore. And I think too is like, I try to push people in front of the camera as well, like in terms of like creative poses and just like playing around and not doing the like traditional like hand on waist, and like just creating like flattering skinny shapes to look leaner. Cause I feel like, I don't know, I like seeing bodies that look like bodies, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think consumers do too, at the end of the day. So you talked a little bit about shooting on film. So what has been brands' reaction to that? Have they been open to that for their lookbooks and things like that, or are they pushing more digital? What have you experienced there?
I actually just booked my first editorial, so that's
Yay!
and they want it to be shot on film.
Amazing.
So very excited about that. For the most part, I actually just had another brand reach out asking to shoot on film too. So there's like it's like a slow growth. Actually, another one, I'm shooting for Henning on the 20th too, I think, or that week. And she wants film and digital. So I think that people are starting to be more open to it, because I do think it kind of has that like immediate feel to it, which I think people really like, that kind of real raw vibe, which I think people now just kind of want. They want to get away from the hyper glossy, hyper, just like, I mean, we're used to seeing that. I feel like this point, like if you look at most like retailers, I feel like a lot of like, especially plus size, they're very heavily retouched, heavily like everything looks punchy and like glamorized. And I just feel like people want to see like, literally just took this on like my disposable camera, like that vibe from, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. So, I mean, I think that's kind of the thing. And it's honestly, it's not that much more expensive. I think people are always afraid about that. But like, I drop the film off and I get it in like 2 to 3 days, and the images are pretty much almost ready to go. They just need like a little bit of work, but it's so much easier than me sitting down at my computer and spending hours going through proof sheets. So I
Yeah,
feel
no, I think that's so true. And one of the questions I actually have for you, so I love Henning, I love Lauren, she's amazing. What a great brand. What are some other brands you think are doing it well in the plus category?
I mean, Henning is definitely great. I love Henning. I'm actually wearing another brand that I'm obsessed with. It is Ray. I haven't shot for them, but I love hearing this all the time, but like, she's very loyal to her photographer, which as a photographer, we love to see it. But I really, really like their pieces. I think that they're playful. I feel like she's constantly like kind of pushing the boundaries in terms of what she's doing, but she literally just started her plus size, like right before COVID. She was like straight sizes and then just expanded. She's currently at 5X and working on 6X. And she's a woman, I think she's a woman of color based in Brooklyn. And like, I love to see that happen for her, because I just think that she's so lovely. But there's so many other ones. I feel like I've really personally been moving away from a lot of the more fast fashion brands. Like, this is a sustainable brand. So that's sort of like what I'm leaning into. Like Veda, you mentioned earlier, I've shot for Veda. I really like Veda. I feel like Warp and Weft does a good job with denim. Loud Body, if you're not familiar with them, I think they're a UK based brand, but they're up to like a size like 40, I feel like, possibly 50. They're super size inclusive, which is amazing.
Amazing. I love that. Yeah, I have a pair of Warp and Weft jeans I really love as well.
Yeah, I really like their denim. So
yeah. No, I think that's really great. And I do think, to your point, we're talking specifically about body inclusivity, but there is this move toward wanting to know more about where your clothes come from, right? So like knowing who the designer is, where they come from, what's their perspective, are they sustainable in what they're doing in that approach, are they size inclusive even if you're not plus size? Like
Yeah.
I think all of those things are so important, for consumers on both sides of the spectrum, whether you are plus size or not plus size, or you are into sustainability, like I think everyone's looking for like that deeper connection. So, for all the brands listening, I think figuring out, to your point, that move away from fashion and really being thoughtful in what you're doing. And I think more and more I'm seeing people shop smaller brands.
I really feel like shift has happened a lot. I feel like I started kind of diving into it this last year. Nicolette's touched on sustainability a lot. We kind of chat all the time about sustainable fashion, but I learned a lot from Mariel Elizabeth on Instagram. She's an amazing sustainable influencer. She does a lot of fit for different brands and kind of helps them like sort of figure out the logistics of how it means to go into sustainability. But I do think that like, especially now, like I'm not leaving my house that often. I don't need a ton of clothing, you know what I mean? I want the clothing that I own to mean something that I truly enjoy, that I know will last me, versus like just like a trend item that it's going to fall apart, I don't want to add to something that could potentially just like ruin our environment at the end of the day. And maybe it's because I'm almost 40, I'm 37. So like, I feel like as you get a little older, you start realizing that it's actually important to kind of really invest in your clothing versus just throw it away at the end of the day,
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. And I think, for all the brands listening, when you're building out, and I get like, right, because a lot of times people are like, sustainability, and like you've been in business for 25 years, you've done everything a certain way. Unpacking that is complicated and expensive.
Totally.
And I totally understand that. I think it's just starting to make the little efforts, right, of like getting to that place. Because I think that's a question of, go ahead.
Definitely like little practices that they can do. I know a few brands have like started doing like a return policy where like if something doesn't fit, or you can trade in a piece and then they in turn take those pieces and donate them, or have them go somewhere that's going to be reused in a more sustainable fashion. Like I think there's definitely ways that you can go about doing that slowly and integrating it, because obviously it's not going to be an immediate switch over unless you're starting with that bases from the get-go, you know what I mean? So, and I get that. Like I feel like, I think a lot of the thing too is like, if I know I'm like, I have pieces in my wardrobe that are still fast fashion, but I've had them for a while and I know I'll wear them. So as long as I like feel like the brand is actually trying and working on it, I think that's, the first step at least. So
Definitely. And you said this in a recent interview, and I love this quote. I think we as a society need to work on the language of fashion and realize that not everything should revolve around flattering the body or appearing thinner. Fashion can be experimental, fun, and exciting. We deserve that too. So as a brand, how do you recommend they sort of broach that line of creating pieces that are, fun and expressive, but also sell really well? Like what is your feeling there?
I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to like, I feel like that's part of the reason that these brands launch plus and they don't do well, because you're launching something that I've seen a million times. Like why would I go to a brand that is never been plus size before and has all these crazy, cute, really adorable cuts, and then you launch your plus size section and here's like a white t-shirt and a pair of denim. Like, I'm not going to come to you for that. I'm looking to what you've created elsewhere that I haven't been able to buy into from the get-go. So like, I think that like you really need to stay true to your brand's like concept and ethos and everything, and not just, give us like the leftovers, is kind of how a lot of people feel when we see things that are introduced in plus. Like, I think, yes, it's important to have basics and elements of that are like elevated basics or things that you want to wear on a regular, consistent basis. But unless you're doing something different, we're not going to buy into it because we already have those options. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a important clarification point. Is like you can't just have plus to have plus. Like it needs to be the style that you're creating for everyone else. Like that's true inclusivity. I remember this kind of hubbub that came out where Tess Holliday wore this like really fun like strawberry. Did you see this dress? It was like this cool dress. and a model wore it, or like a celebrity wore it or something, and it got all this. Yeah, and it was like the coolest dress ever, selling out everywhere. And when she wore it, it got like railed as like a disaster of an outfit or something like that. And I just think
which is so funny because my friend styled that outfit. So okay.
Oh, I
Yeah.
loved it. I was like, this is, I
Yeah.
remember when she wore it and it was so cool. And so, I mean, she's just so cool. And, but that's a media problem, right? Like this is a media perception now that we have.
Yeah,
So
like, it's just not like flattering on her because it was like a what is that cut called?
empire waist kind of.
Yeah, and it's like they're like, well, it wasn't flattering, it didn't highlight her waist, but she looks like a pink cupcake. Of course, it's like not supposed to look like traditionally flattering, but it's fun, and she's like being a little flirty and like giving a different perspective. I see so many people wearing that type of dress, and like there's never an issue.
Totally. And I thought, I mean, she just looks amazing in whatever she wears. I mean, she looked like Glenda the Good Witch in like a good way, you know, like it's awesome.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, to your point, it's like people still can't, from a media perspective, like they immediately go to unflattering, right? So
Yeah.
now that, you know, we're having this conversation, so what can buyers, brands, and retailers do to change what media and advertising looks like so that more people feel accurately represented and reflected in what they're doing?
I mean, I think a lot of it is like a circular argument because when it comes down to it's like also the stylists, it's the people that are like, when you're actually producing campaign shoots to promote the pieces, I want to see it done in fun ways. They're not the more traditional ways as well. I think like it's not going to happen overnight. Like we just have to continue to push it. Because a lot of people as a fat human have like it ingrained in them that they can't wear certain things. And so I think it's just really going to come with time, which is like the unfortunate part. But I do think that like creating editorials, creating campaigns, creating lookbooks, like even in the lookbooks on your e-com, style it in a way that's non-traditional. Maybe you do like the basic e-com shots, and then you have like one where it's like styled a little differently. And I think that's sort of important. And also like, I feel like there's so many brands that are doing it pretty well. Like I do think, I'm trying to think of like e-commerce that's like, I mean, some brands are just shooting e-com, like, well, Ray shoots their e-com with film, like, so it's just all very fun and like just has an edge to it, which I also think helps because I feel like we want to be able to see ourselves in it and also feel aspirational. And I feel like a plus size always just feels like, oh, it's the girl next door, you can see yourself in it. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to like feel something when I look at a photo. I want to feel like a mood. I want to feel like, well, I want to be that person, which I think is a lot of what comes down to like straight size campaigns and editorials and stuff, where they look cooler than the person potentially wanting to purchase it feels. And so that's like that aspirational idea, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting. I mean, the stylist does play a huge role in that, right? Of like making that, you know, not just the same thing over and over again. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I feel like there were so many great takeaways from the language that you use, the styling aspect of it, and getting a little bit outside of the box and raw and maybe doing some film photography. Thank you so much, Lydia. This was great.
Thanks for having me.